And can everyone see my screen? Yes, okay. Hi, everyone. For those of you who didn't meet me yesterday, I'm Kat Mañalac. I'm a partner at Y Combinator. As partners at Y Combinator, we read applications, we interview companies, we fund them, and we work with the startups and help them as they grow. I also head up outreach at YC, which means outreach to potential applicants. So I get to work with a lot of founders even before they apply to YC. And so I'm very excited to meet some of you over the next few days. So today I'm going to share a little bit of background on YC for those of you who didn't see yesterday. And I'm also going to share 3 things that we get to work with founders on during the program. So as really quick background, since 2005, YC has funded about 2,500 startups and nonprofits. So YC was funded in 2005 because the founders, Paul, Graham, and Jessica Livingston, really believed that if you're a smart, hardworking person, you could make more of an impact building your own company versus joining someone else's. So YC now has a community of over 5,000 founders. And, when people ask me, what is it that makes YC work? Why is it, so different from all the other startup communities in the world? I really think it's the incredible community of founders that we've sort of brought together and that has worked with us over the years. So our companies now have a combined valuation of over $200 billion. There are some companies we've funded that you might have heard of, like Airbnb, Dropbox. I think there are 25 companies now that are valued at over $1 billion and about 150 that are valued at over 100 million. So a lot are growing. And we've also funded 2 companies with Japanese founders, Fond and Alpaca. Alpaca just announced that they raised a $10 million Series A this week. So it's been exciting news for Japanese founders in YC. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, I know this is called How to Build a $1 Billion Company. And $1 billion is, or billion, is a number that a lot of people are obsessed with in Silicon Valley and maybe everywhere. But sometimes the best way to get to $1 billion is to help people think differently about how to get their very first dollar and how to get their very first user. So I'm going to talk about 3 of the most important things we work with startups on at YC during the 3-month program. I'll talk a little bit about how we help companies with clarity of idea and why that's important. I'll talk about focusing on numbers, and I'll talk about the big, exciting vision. So first, let's talk about clarity of idea. So we believe that people who have thought deeply about a problem and an idea can explain it clearly and succinctly in a way anyone can understand. They use less words and they make it possible for anyone to also describe what they're doing. So at the end of YC's 3-month program, our startups present at Demo Day in front of thousands of the world's top investors. So at Demo Day, each of our startups only gets 2 minutes to describe what they're doing and to get people excited to join them on their journey. And they are presenting over the course of 2 days alongside 200 other, very high potential, exciting startups. So when you only have, when you only have 2 minutes to present, you really have to make sure that you're expressing yourself clearly and succinctly in a way that anyone who's watching you, any investor, can remember. Sometimes, you'll go up to a random investor in the audience at Demo Day and say, hey, what did you remember about that company, Boom Supersonic? And they'll say, oh, it's something about, supersonic passenger jets, they got a $5 billion LOI. Investors can only really remember 2 or 3 points about your company at any given time. So it's important to really very clearly talk about the problem that you're solving and why it's important. So not all startups, not all founders are naturally good at doing this. And it's something that we work with our startups on during group office hours. So during the YC program, every 2 weeks, you'll meet in a group with 2 or 3 of your group partners and about 10 other startups. And at the very first meeting, you'll go around, the group and you'll introduce yourselves and you'll introduce your company. So, as I said, not all founders are great at describing what they do, and so it's something that we try to help founders with. We help them try to articulate this, and as do their peers. So often, I've noticed for you biotech and deep tech founders in the audience, they have a particularly hard time clearly and succinctly describing what they do in a way that anyone can understand. And one of the reasons is because they describe what they're doing with technical and scientific jargon that they're used to using with their peers and with the researchers they've worked with the doctors they've worked with. But as a startup founder, you're not always talking to your peers. Sometimes you're talking to investors, sometimes you're talking to press, and you have to very clearly and simply define the problem you're solving and why it's important. And communicating clearly is important because a clear idea is the best foundation for growth. The best companies and movements grow organically by word of mouth. And that's good news because, organic growth is the cheapest way to grow. You don't have to pay, the tax of advertising or marketing dollars. And if you think back to the first time you heard about some of the products that you and services that you love to use, say, TikTok or Uber, it's probable that you heard about those companies through a friend, not through, the press or through the founders. Like you might have heard about it through a friend who told you about it. Talking about what you do is one of the most important jobs as a founder because you're going to need that skill to convince co-founders to join you, investors, users, potential employees, shareholders. You'll need to keep repeating what it is you do clearly so that all of these people can help you grow. And all of these people you should be able to use them as your viral sales force. That's why it's necessary to make it easy for anyone, your grandfather, your sister, the person you meet when you're walking down the street or in the elevator. Make it easy for them to remember what you do, to describe what they do, so they can help you spread the word virally. When people sit around at the dinner table, your startup should be the one that they're talking about. So here's how I kind of work with startups to come up with that short, memorable description of their company. So first, I tell startup founders to lead with what, not with why. And this might seem counterintuitive because we usually tell stories chronologically. So when we're telling a real story, we'll talk about how we discovered a problem, and then we'll talk about why the problem is so big, and only at the end will we talk about how we're solving it. But one reason, and I think one reason a lot of you founders do this is because you're ambitious people and you want to solve these big, exciting problems, and you need that trait as a founder. But when you only have a limited time with someone, say 2 minutes at demo day, or you're talking to an investor, or you're talking to someone in the press, it's important to give them context up front. You have to start with that one sentence of what you do, and then you can get into the longer backstory. So a lot of people will start like this. They'll say, my mother was a small business owner, and I saw her spending 30 hours per week managing employee timesheets. But if you've already got 30 seconds in your story and you haven't told me what it is you do, I'm already lost. I've already zoned out. I have no context. So as I said, don't do this, and start with that one sentence that tells us what you're building first before you get into the backstory. Second, this is a tweet from Gary Tan, who is a former YC partner. But he said, meaningless jargon is the number one issue I spend time trying to fight when helping startups. And so this, for example, what I'm going to show you next is an actual description of a startup that was used. It says, IndieCloud is a know-how synergy platform. Don't say stuff like this. It has zero informational content about what you actually do. When you're describing your company, the person you're talking to should be able to recreate in their heads with some, level of correctness. They should have some idea how to build what it is you're pitching them. They should have some idea of how to reproduce in their heads what it is you're building. So if you think about IndieCloud, A know-how synergy platform could be anything. It could be a collaborative ed tech company. It could be a marketplace for experts. You have no idea what Indie Cloud is actually doing. And then third, this is another mistake a lot of startup founders make. They just ramble. They talk on for too long. So don't do that, because investors and press people and people who work in startups, we hear tens, if not hundreds of pitches per week. And so you want to be as concise as possible. So this is the actual description that Airbnb used on their YC application. We built the first online marketplace that lets travelers book rooms with locals instead of hotels. This is a really tight description. They describe what they're building and who they're building it for. You don't need to go into incredibly deep detail in just the first sentence. And here's an example of another YC company, one that came up yesterday and earlier today as well. Boom is building supersonic passenger jets. So this is a compelling one-sentence pitch. As I said, you don't need to go into deep detail in that first sentence. You just have to say something compelling enough to kind of hook the listener. And what you want is, when you say your description to someone, they should have follow-up questions for you. They should immediately have questions that they want to ask. If you talk about what you're building, if you say your one-sentence pitch and the person that you're looking at doesn't have any response, that's a bad signal. So just to recap, your one-liners should be descriptive, they should be conversational, they shouldn't use too much technical jargon. It should be, said in words that anyone can understand. And there should be no long-winded preamble. It should be very concise, because the people you're talking to and pitching, hear tons of pitches per week. So you want to be memorable, and you want to be concise. And one thing I wanted to note is that if you're talking to investors, you don't have to sell us. We'll sell ourselves. But before an investor can really sell themselves on your vision and what you're doing, they have to just understand you first. So clarity of vision is one of the most important things for founders to really develop in the early days of their company. And then once you can explain the idea, then you can focus on numbers and you can focus on growth. So at YC, as I mentioned yesterday, we don't provide room and board or office space for the companies that go through our program. And this also ends up being, I think, one of the best things that we do for startups. So what we do at YC is we really create a framework for focus. We give founders the ability to focus on nothing but the product and their users for 3 months. We tell the teams they shouldn't be fundraising, they shouldn't be hiring, they shouldn't be speaking at events. They should just be simply focusing on building stuff and talking to users. And so that, I talk to a lot of alumni after they leave YC, and they often say that the 3 months they spent in the program was the most highly leveraged 3 months of their company's life. Like, it was the most productive, and that even after YC, they really try to sometimes, set up, sprints, or they set up, office hours or different ways to get them back on track and to give them that kind of focus. So what happens at YC is our partners work really intensely with the companies for 3 months to improve their products and services and to figure out, a sales strategy. And then we also like to create an environment of trust where founders are really willing to tell us and each other what's really going on with their companies. Because here's the thing. It's really easy to lie to ourselves. If you walk around Silicon Valley and you ask any given founder, oh, how's it going? How's your startup going? They'll say, oh, it's awesome. We're growing up and to the right. Things are going really well. But that's definitely not the case, right? For most startups, like, every startup has issues. All co-founders have problems, but no one wants to create a narrative where they're not doing well. But the problem is, focus on looking good versus actually being good can be dangerous. So during office hours and group office hours, we really try to create an environment where founders can tell the truth to one another and stay accountable not only to them, to their partners and to themselves, but to their peers as well. So at the beginning of YC, if you're a company going through the program, you'll sit down with one of your group partners and they help you sort of identify your demo day goal. Like, what should you be focusing on for the next 3 months? And often that's, focusing on just one thing, one number. What one number can we help you grow 10% weekly? So for many software companies, for example, that might be revenue or that might be users. And for hard tech and bio companies, those goals are different. They're usually an ambitious but achievable goal that you can accomplish in 3 months. So for some companies, that might be getting LOIs or letters of intent from potential customers. Boom, for example, their goal was to get LOIs, and they got an LOI for a $5 billion contract from Virgin Galactic right before demo day. So it'll depend on what type of company you are, but we really sit down with each of you and figure how should you be focusing your energy and your time in this 3 months. And once we know the number that you should be focusing on, I think the next question to work on is how big can this get? And that's kind of moving into the third thing that I wanted to talk about is the big vision. So the big vision here is we ask the question, how big can this get? How does this, early idea or MVP product, how could it become a $1 billion startup? And part of it is just believing that you can build something that can be worth $1 billion. And at YC, we don't ever try to predict what the next big idea will be. We can only predict one thing. And we know, the only thing we really know for sure is that strong teams, strong founders can produce $1 billion startups. And, this is the whole premise that YC is based on. As I said, YC was started because Paul and Jessica really believed that if you were a smart, hardworking person, it was better for you to be building your own company and making more impact that way than just working for someone else. So one of the most fun parts of our job is we get to work alongside these founders and teams, and we get to dream alongside them. We get to help founders take their ideas to the extreme. So, we ask, what would happen if everyone in the world had this technology? What's the most interesting thing possible that could be done or learned from it? So, to summarize, 3 of the things that we really work closely with founders on are, first, clarity of idea, making sure you're communicating clearly and succinctly so that anyone can understand you, even people that are not from your academic background, any investors who might, be interested but not know in depth, the jargon that you're using to describe what you do. Second is we really help founders focus in on the numbers and focus in on spending their time in, the right ways. As I said, we give founders this framework for focus and basically they do nothing for 3 months other than building the product and talking to users. And we help founders with big visions. Sometimes founders get so in the weeds of what they're doing that they also forget to communicate what is the biggest vision, how big could this become, how impactful could this be? And I think, that's one of the most fun parts of the job is kind of helping founders kind of clarify that vision as well. So before, we wrap up, I did just want to say that, one thing that I didn't mention in that top 3 things was what was, I think, one of the most important things about YC. So as I said earlier, when people ask me why I think, YC has worked or why it's done so well, why we have more billion-dollar companies and a bigger network than any other accelerator or, startup organization in the world, I really think it's because of the strength of the founders. In 2005, in the very first batch of YC, there were just 8 companies, and those 8 companies had the founders of what became Twitch, Justin Kahn and Emmett Shear. It had Reddit, Alexis Ohanian and Steve Huffman, and it also had Sam Altman, who later became YC's president. And from there, I think Paul and Jessica really did a great job of building a foundation and a culture where that really trusted in technical talent, technical founders, and helped them helped all these companies as they grow. And so YC now has created a lot of mechanisms for our alumni to help each other. We've built software called Bookface that makes it easy for our founders connect and help one another. And so I think beyond these 3 things that I last mentioned, I really think network and community is very important when it comes to building huge companies that have a lot of impact. So I wanted to encourage you all to apply to YC. You can still apply to the YC winter 2021 batch now. We're reading late applications basically until the end of December. So I would get your application in sooner than later if you're considering applying. But if as long as you get it in before December, I think you're in reasonable shape. And then if you're thinking about if you're interested in potentially applying for these summer 2021 batch, the application deadline will be in late March. So you'll keep an eye out for that, but you'll just go to ycombinator.com/apply. And then if you have any questions at all about the application process or anything, you can always email us at apply@ycombinator.com, and we'll be happy to answer them.